election overview as well. Thank you so much, Grace.
Yeah, hey folks. So I think really well when looking at data with graphs and everything. So I am going to talk at you, but I'm also going to share my screen. And this is just very much of a bigger, broader overview of what did DC like turnout and like voter registration like efforts look like in 2024, and how can we see that like in the data. Um, so Oh, thanks. So before I share my screen, just to give you a little bit of an update about what you're going to probably be hearing today. So during this section, I will be talking a little bit more about the data, but in the later half of a little bit earlier than half, we'll be talking also with some panelists about, their own work. The reason why we wanted to start with some information about the data is I'm sure as, November came and went, you guys heard a lot about the results and how we are now starting to see election results in action with new people taking office or have already taken office and new policies being pursued. That's our government on display. That is what we all expect with these elections as they come and go. But you might have also seen a lot of analysis of the data about how people did or did not turn out to vote. What does that mean for civic health in general? And also, what does it mean moving forward with people who engage in elections? The League of Women Voters, obviously, we have voters in our title. We care about voters. We do a lot with elections, nonpartisan, of course. But when we are doing our work, we also think more about what does it mean to participate in democracy? What does it mean to be a citizen on a very broader scale, right? Civic health can, be reflected in elections, but it can also look like other things too. So as we are looking at the data for the 2024 elections, we are thinking very broadly about what does this mean for how folks are plugging into their communities, and then, how can we better reach out to them if, they can't or do vote at the end of the day. So I'm going to share my screen now. I love the very awkward mechanics of sharing your screen on a Zoom call. Okay, can everyone see the screen? Great, thank you. I love the thumbs up. Okay. This was a generated theme slide deck, so I don't really know why there's a basketball court in the end, but just pretend that you didn't see that. Okay, so one of the more important things I think to talk about is what was turnout in 2024 in DC, and also what does that look like compared to national turnout rates. So in DC, we did pretty good. We had a 70.8% in turnout rate overall, which means a little bit less than 30% turned out to vote. Now, what does that mean in comparative to other years? I think that's a very important question because you might see this and be like, okay, 70% doesn't look like a ton of turnout when we have 30% not turning out. So let's put this a little bit more in terms of, comparison. So the 2024 election was that you just saw for the pie chart, that was for the November election, comparing to the more immediate election that preceded it, the primary. You can see this very typical trend where people turn out more in the general elections than they do in the primary elections. This is true nationwide, and of course, it's going to be true in DC too. What's very interesting is you can see this very big gap of people who, jump in terms of, participating, not just in voting, but also registering to vote. So we see back when the primary was going on in the spring and summer, there was, a little bit under 400,000 people who are registered to vote. And then the registration rates jumped in the few months right before the election. That's not particularly unique in DC. We see this across the nation. A lot of people are going to dramatically increase the likelihood that they're going to register to vote right before a major election. And the fact that this was a presidential election means that we're going to have like a huge increase, just like, across the board too, in comparison to like super local elections or midterm elections as well. So this is kind of cool to see in and of itself. But again, we care about like comparing the data and trying to see trends from it. So let's talk a little bit about what this looks like in other years. So like I said earlier, people in primary elections don't really turn out to the same degree as they would in the general elections. So just comparing general elections from the years, you can see what I would say a very interesting I guess not trend per se, but you can see like there is this huge drop off in comparison to previous election years in terms of people who are registered, even though voting seems to do like really well this year. So as you can see in 2022, 2020, 2018, and 2016, there are far more people who are registered to vote in DC than there were in 2024. And I just, made sure that these numbers were up to date this morning for the 2024 election. So this is like fairly up to date data. And when you compare this with the ballots casted, 2022 had a particularly huge, disparity in terms of people who turned out versus people who are registered. But again, this was a midterm year, same with 2018. So 2020 being like the most immediate and best year to compare for the presidential election turnout. There seems to still be like a very big disparity between people who could register to vote but didn't. But when I was like first looking at this data, I thought it was very interesting to note not just this decrease here in terms of like the registration rates, but also thinking more of like, could this be indicative of the fact that maybe less people move here? Gentrification is totally a thing. Maybe people are being pushed out of the district, all those other things that you could talk about. But even compared with population data, there's not really a very big answer to what's going on because there's actually an increase in the population data over the years. Yeah, and again, like you don't see like this increase being reflected with the registration rates. So there starts to be a little bit for me when I look at this, this narrative of people are here, we have more people coming here, but they're not getting registered. And why is that? And I think like one other thing, again, I just want to be like very, clear about is voter turnout rates in DC are really really good. And we have almost like a 5% increase just from the 2020 election to the 2024 election. So it doesn't seem like the fact that people are, not turning out to vote per se, just because the turnout rates are being like they're looking at how many people are registered and how many people are actually casting a ballot. The overall number might look better even if like the registered numbers are not well. Yeah, to the comment that's in the chat, DCBOE has been taking people off of the voter records who have not either been voting over the past years or deceased, whatever. Voter maintenance is a thing that is required of all. I'm going to just call I consider DC a state, even though legally I know it's not a state. And obviously it's a platform that we're pushing. So I'm just going to say it here. Compared to all other states, that is something everyone is like doing. Just because people are being taken off the rolls per se, the population point is still like a consideration. The fact that the population is increasing, but you don't see it reflected with the registration rates. So even if registration rates go down per se, you would expect some increase in comparison with the population too. Yeah. But anyway, I think like this is all DC. I promise to talk about nationwide. Do we see this in other places too? Without getting too deep in the weeds about registration data, I do think it is again, important to talk about turnout rate because that is what we are concerned about at the end of the day when we look at, you know, who is and is not participating in elections. DC is also doing very well in comparison to other states, right? DC ranks in the top quarter of states in terms of turnout, with Wisconsin being the highest, in Hawaii being the lowest at 50%. But yeah, DC, if you're going to take it to mean anything that's indicative of other jurisdictions, it is like leading the country in terms of at least turnout. So again, getting back to like this, what do we think is going on? There are a few theories that people are putting out there, and I think it's important to talk about them, but also acknowledge the fact that they are theories. We don't really know exactly what's going on. All we can do is remark about what's happening with the data and give like indications of what could or could not be going on. One is that there are just like, you know, tighter races in other localities. A lot of people move to DC, but they might be, you know, native somewhere else and they want to still participate in elections there because they still identify with their communities back in another state. I actually moved here in 2023. I'm from Texas. Texas is not necessarily a competitive state nationwide in certain elections, but I always, I think, have the ability to vote in that election if I still identify with that community, keeping domicile requirements in mind. Other theories that are out there is, you know, you might have heard of these political discontent or apathy. I like to remind people that I don't think that voters are necessarily apathetic. I think they have a lot of interest in what's going on right now, but they might feel disaffected with what's going on a national scale. You might think that that's one reason why people are not engaging in elections. You might also think that there's like a big misunderstanding about what's going on with the local races in DC in particular. And there are some indications that that might be going on with more localized races, and we'll look at those in a second. But again, turnout is like helpful if we're trying to test a little bit of these theories. One of them being the fact that look at like at-large membership. So back in November, for an at-large member, you had the ability on the ballot, if you remember, if you were voting in DC, to pick two people for this local office. What's interesting is you see the fact that there are a significant amount of people who undervoted. So maybe ballot design had something to do with the fact that a lot of people were not voting, I guess, to the capabilities that they could have in this one race because of so much undervoting. And again, like this might contribute to the fact that there's like this misunderstanding about what's going on with the local races to some degree. Another way to look at this is looking at the ANC elections. I'm going to see if I can move this a little bit to show you a little bit what I mean with the ANCs. Looking at the undervote counts, I think is important because you can see again, people who are not deciding to participate to the full extent that they could in like this particular race. This is just, you know, the first ANC like race that pops up when you look at the election results on the DCBOE's website. But there's like a fairly steady amount of people who are undervoting in these elections. And it's not just in this one, you know, district, you pick a random one. It's fairly steady that a lot of people are undervoting. Yeah, Aaron, that's a great point too. And there's a lot of uncontested races as well, which might lead people not to want to pick anything. But even then, like, for example, this one right here that I'm circling, it's a contested one, and there's still a significant amount of people who undervote, even in those. Not even necessarily to a unique degree above the other uncontested elections. But yeah, so we keep coming back to this question, looking at the data, like what's going on and what does this mean moving forward? This is not me picking on state voices. I think this is just like the immediate thing that I thought of when thinking about this narrative that was coming forward. We saw a lot of, oh, someone said they do not see my screen. Can y'all not see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, actually, I think it's fine now because we're not looking at any more graphs. Um, at least like moving forward, when people are like looking at the data for registration and turnout, I saw a lot of rhetoric that was related to what is what does this mean for us moving forward? And a lot of people pointing to community and having to plug back into community as a way to feel a little bit more connected, not just with your elections, but also like what's going on politically, locally, and as like a way to, not just get through the next 4 years, which is a lot of what people were working on following the 2024 election, but just like in perpetuity, being more involved with your community, not just around the election cycle, but in all other times. Um, that kind of leads us to where we're going to be talking with other folks, our panelists here today, which again, thank y'all again for being here. I think when we're having these conversations about community, one of the more frustrating things for me when I hear about people say, oh, just plug into your community, is there's not really a conversation about how to actually do that. I think a lot of people understand that they need to be a little bit more connected to their neighbors and the different ways that they could be connected, but they still don't know how to engage with that and what are the first steps are to doing that. So that is a little bit of the overview of the data and like how it's connecting to the next portion of what we're talking about today. But I'm going to stop talking because I think I took up almost the full extent of what I thought I was going to, and turn it over to our panelists to actually fill in that part of how do we be in community with each other. So with that, if you guys have questions, happy to answer them. But I'm just going to turn it back over to Anna.
Thanks, Grace. If you have questions about anything that Grace just presented, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can circle back, or Grace can answer them in text. We're just going to hop to intros really quickly. And so we'll start with Ann Stauffer and go through.
Okay, great. Thanks. Hi. Happy to be there. Obviously, I'm Ann Stauffer. I'm actually a vice president of issues and advocacy with the League. And so as Barbara mentioned, we are nonpartisan, but also political. We work to strengthen and improve democracy in DC, but we don't support or do any work with individual candidates. And we also do a lot of work to strengthen quality of life in DC. I personally have lived in DC, I often say on and off since '89, but actually now that the bottle bill's back in play, it actually reminds me I was here in '87 for that fight too. So, and my parents lived here, my sister lives here, and my nephew was born here. So almost a DC native, maybe, if I can claim that. Thanks.
Thanks. All right, Erin.
Thank you so much. Just want to say a quick thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this together. I know a lot of people are feeling fearful or anxious about what comes next. And so having these spaces to have a constructive conversation about what that can look like is extremely helpful. So thank you for doing this. I'm Erin Palmer, and I am a former advisory neighborhood commissioner in Ward 4 in the Tacoma neighborhood on the DC side. And I am also a lawyer. I spent a bulk of my career working on judicial ethics and accountability issues, which was interesting at the time and is having reverberations even now. I have 3 children who are 14, 12, and 9, and they're a big part of what motivates me to be active in the community. And I'm grateful to be here, so thank you for having me.
Awesome. Natalie?
Hey everyone, my name is Natalie Fuchs. I am the president of the board for the Petworth Community Market, Farmers Market, talking about hyperlocal spaces. We have a very small but mighty farmers market, but looking at how some of those hyperlocal community spaces can be used to engage, feel a little bit closer in community, and also how that can represent a really good spot for civic engagement. I've been in DC for coming up on 12 years. I've lived in Petworth for about 4, and I've been president for the last 3 years. So excited to see how we can expand civic engagement in some of these hyperlocal spaces.
Hey everyone, my name is Ankit Jain. I'm our non-voting, often called shadow senator here in Washington, D.C., one of two. As most of you, or I assume all of you know, in D.C., we don't have any voting senators or representatives. So the D.C. government has created two non-voting senators and one non-voting representative to be our elected advocates for D.C. statehood, to protect home rule from attack, and basically be our elected lobbyists for our rights before the Congress. And so I was sworn in on January 2nd of this year. And so just getting started. Obviously, some interesting times we're in right now to get started in this position. And I am a Ward 2 resident and a proud member of the League of Women Voters. And before I ran for office, I was just, I'd been involved in the statehood movement, was a member of the DC Democrats, and had been doing advocacy around statehood, especially, in 2021 when we had some hope that we could actually move the bill forward. And I'm very excited to be here, excited to talk to you all about civic health. And you're on mute.
And you're mute.
How many years have we been doing Zoom? Still happens. So Anna's asked that we just move along following the same order we just did our introductions. And I think the first question that that is like on deck is like civic health in DC. What does it mean? How do I perceive how it is, and how do we participate in it as the league? And so to me, civic health means that you're really engaging with all parts of what makes the district a strong, vibrant community. And that to me does mean political participation. I think there are lots of people who say, I don't like politics, but I think we need to reclaim that, because politics is really about being part of shaping the values and policies of the district. Like what kind of world do you want to live in? I think community organizations and care are also part of civic health. Like, are there organizations that support the district's residents in not just surviving, but thriving? And do we have a culture that supports all members of the community? And social connectedness is also part of that. So do residents know each other? Do they have gathering spaces to get to know each other? Do we have these, markets and other areas? And my sense is that DC's civic health is strong in community organizations and care and in social connectedness, but a weaker, I would say, in the political side based on voter turnout. And I know Grace talked about voter turnout in the general election, but in DC, there's also, I think, a big discussion to be had about voter turnout in the primary, where, as we know, a lot of decisions are actually made on positions. And I guess we didn't look at the ward breakout, but there's always an interesting discussion about turnout among wards. And then engagement in actually shaping policy with involvement from people across the district. So how does the league work on sort of the in the civic health space and strengthening civic health? Well, we're definitely known for voter registration and information. I think we could also do more in voter turnout. We definitely work on statehood advocacy, because we feel like we can't truly shape our community and thrive without the protection of being a state and free from congressional interference. And then we support policies that improve democracy, like the Initiative 83 effort, which would bring ranked choice voting and open the primaries to independent voters, and the quality of living in DC, which is bills like we work on a lot of climate issues, like the bottle bill and other beyond gas efforts. So that's sort of where we are on civic health. Turn it over, I guess, to Erin.
Yes, thank you, Anne. You have raised so many important things. My brain is turning as you talk about civic health, because it is both a simple and straightforward concept, but also huge. Like, civic health is a huge thing. And when I was jotting down notes, the things that come to mind for me are engagement, trust, and collaboration. So it's like the cohesiveness of a community. And there's an anecdote that I come back to very regularly when I'm thinking about what I guess is ultimately civic health. I wasn't calling it this in the past, but I think this is what it is, which is that when I first ran for advisory neighborhood commissioner, and I realized I should have explained what this was because there's always someone in the room who doesn't know. It's the hyper localist of neighborhood level elected officials. So very, very tiny. Each commissioner represents about 2,000 people. So when I first ran and was door knocking, I talked to a woman who has school-age children, and she said, I just don't know how to be active and engaged with the community because my kid goes to a school in a different neighborhood. So I don't know how to meet people. I don't know how to form those connections. And it stood out to me and has come up time and again in doing commission level work and other work that public schools have kind of eroded as a community hub. They used to play a much more important role in the ways that we formed connections with each other. And that's a function of a lot of different things, including school choice. And I say that with mixed criticism. My kids are at a charter school. I won't go into that debate, but and then having run for citywide office and seeing kind of the broader picture in terms of how people talk about community hubs, there were so many people who raised the point that boys and girls clubs don't really exist anymore. So this idea that these neighborhood spaces where we gather are being carved away. That's something that I often think about, and the role that neighbors can play in kind of trying to collect each other to build that social cohesion. There were a few other points I wanted to make about this. So I think part of what's so challenging right now is we have an administration that's come in that is built around misinformation and fear. And what that does is it attempts to further break down and erode this cohesion, this civic health. And when people react to and act based on fear, they're not necessarily acting to build civic health. So we see this play out at the local level. And when people are scared, they take very peculiar positions on things that are for the greater good. So when you see someone feeling threatened in their own stability, they'll come out and they'll do something like oppose an emergency shelter in the neighborhood. So in terms of, this is a long-winded way of talking about what neighborhood level elected officials can and do sometimes, but part of it is helping people both build those connections and to feel safer in their communities such that there's more likelihood of responsiveness and building around collective good and not just like, I need to protect myself because I'm scared about what's happening in the world. So that's what I think about in terms of civic health and how it relates to some neighborhood level issues. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ankit.
I think it's Natalie next, right? I'll let you go ahead, Natalie.
Thank you. I honestly, all very good points already made. And I think the thing I was gonna hit on, a couple points that I was gonna hit pretty strongly on that have already been mentioned. The first is, caring about the community that doesn't just look like you, and understanding the broader community that is DC or your neighborhood, who your neighbors actually are. I live in Petworth, and just kind of calling it what it is, certainly a gentrifying area in a lot of ways. And so understanding and being respectful of the community that has existed here before you, understanding how to integrate that community better as well. And making sure that all voices are heard when you are bringing together a community space like a local farmers market. I think in general, when we talk about civic health, I think it should be an understanding that politics is personal, and it's not necessarily about what side of the aisle that you sit on, but understanding that the politics directly impacts people's individual lives. I think a lot of the time when we talk in the farmers market space about, food access, food security, food justice, a lot of those concepts can sound a bit esoteric. They're like, oh, that doesn't impact me. I don't deal with those things. But you are part of the food ecosystem. You do engage in a local market. You are eating at restaurants in the district, right? So you're part of that, whether you want to be or not. You buy groceries from either a local grocery store or from a big chain grocery store. So I think that there are ways that people try and kind of push it off and say, oh, that's not me, but it is. And I know that one thing we're really trying to push forward, like at our farmers market, are more educational initiatives. And so when I look at improving civic health in DC, taking the time to make sure that the hyperlocal spaces, that neighborhood representation, things that we're even doing more broadly in the district, focus on that education element, and helping to kind of bring home what politics actually means, because it impacts not just you and the people that look like you, but your neighbors who also are part of your community, even if they don't look exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, I can go ahead. So I do think a lot about what is civic health and what does it mean? And so for me, what I think about is civic health is positive civic health is meaning that is when people feel like their government is either working for them or that they can influence their government and change it so that it can work for them in the future, and that that it's both the governmental side and the community side, which is that people feel connected to their community and they feel that they can have positive and productive conversations about others in their community about the direction that the community is going and the actions the government can take to move things forward. And so I think it's both the having the government work and feeling connected to the society and community as a whole. So looking at DC and our civic health, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I would say that we have the best election system in the country, and then we make it as easy to vote as anyone else in this country. You looked at our turnout rate; it was 70.8% this cycle in the top percentile, 25%. Even though in the general election in DC, there were very few competitive races, and the presidential race, especially, which is what most people are focused on, was not really in doubt in Washington, D.C. And so to have such a high turnout rate with such a kind of lopsided majority on one side, I think speaks to how easy it is to vote, where everybody gets mailed a ballot. If you, for whatever reason, you don't get a ballot in the mail or you want to vote in person, you can go to any vote center in the city. You can drop your ballot off in the drop box. You can mail it back. You're automatically registered to vote. You can register on the same day and vote if you want to. All of that, you combine all of that together, and it shows how easy it is to vote in this country. But or say in the city, not in this country. But I guess the flip side of that is we don't have elections, especially in the general election, that feel super competitive, I think, to people. And so I will say that when I was running, what we looked at, we were estimating how many people would vote in my race. And what we found was that by far the most important thing in determining whether there be high turnout or not was whether there was a competitive mayoral primary or competitive presidential primary in that election cycle. In years where there was competitive mayoral primaries or presidential primaries, the turnout was much higher in the primary than in years where that was not the case, because those are the races that everybody knows about. Everyone knows who the mayor is, everyone knows who the president is, and that they feel strongly about. And if they think their vote can actually make an impact on that, then they're more likely to turn out. And so that, I don't think it's a surprise that Wisconsin was the highest turnout in the country, right? That was one of the closest 3 states in the country. And so because we don't have we're not a state, and we don't have any voting senators or representatives, and the one race we do have a vote in, the president, is very lopsided. I do think that people feel disempowered sometimes in the city, and they feel like their vote doesn't matter, their voice doesn't matter. And unfortunately, I have to say that our voice does matter a lot less than other people in this country, because we don't have those voting senators or representatives. And I think this is especially true, and you'll see this east of the river, where people feel like they're not being heard, their voices are not being heard. And the number one thing I would say that we can do to try to increase decrease the feeling of disempowerment, increase people feeling empowered, is to get DC statehood, right? Make it so that we have 2 voting senators and representatives, so that people feel more connected to the national environment and feel like they're more willing to get out there and go vote. And then I think another thing we can do is see what are some changes we can make to our elections to make them more competitive. Because so many of our elections, even in the primary, are not even that competitive. And so Are there changes we can make, such as, moving to proportional representation is one example, where you have multiple representatives and you have to get a much smaller percentage of the vote rather than winner take all, 50%, and you win. And so people feel like there's more competition for the more seats, and two, they have somebody who represents their interests more closely than the one person who can get a 50% of the vote. I think there was there was a stat was showing the undervoting in the at-large election. So that's an example of where our election system probably disempowers people to some degree, because people don't realize there's only one election where you get 2 votes, which is the at-large general election. Every other race on the ballot, you only get 1 vote. And I heard that story from a lot of people, including people who are pretty plugged into politics, right? And they didn't realize that in the at-large race, they just had 2 votes. The good thing I'll say is that Initiative 83, if it is implemented, which I hope it is, would change that, and every election system would be exactly the same, where everybody would get able to rank 5 candidates no matter what election system it is. And so I do think that will play a large impact in reducing undervoting in the at-large race. So, I mean, I think there's a lot we can do. I think making statehood happen, making sure we can have competitive elections, and also, of course, protecting our home rule from attack, right? So I think I'll talk a little bit more later. Someone asked the question about the act that was introduced to repeal DC home rule. If you have our local government abolished and people have no say whatsoever, I mean, that is a surefire recipe to reduce civic health. So I'll talk more about that, about what's going on, but I do think that we need to protect home rule to protect civic health.
Okay, thanks. I want to welcome Lamont Mitchell. So Lamont, if you want to also introduce yourself, and then we were just sort of discussing like what civic health means to us, and how does our organization participate in civic health in DC, and what do we think the state of civic health is?
Thank you very much. Sorry for being late. I had in fact, 2 other engagements, and I'm just getting back in where I could take this call. But I'm Lamont Mitchell, the chairman of the board of Anacostia Coordinating Council, and Phil Pinnell is executive director. Been involved in city life for the past 6 decades, even though I look young. But this is a great topic, because civic health is very, very important in terms of locally what it means to me, because our work at ACC is to improve civic health. That's the participation in the political process, the democratic process, information sharing and gathering, and for the people who are marginalized, in which we might serve east of the river, voices really heard in the process. But one of the big, the last speaker talked about it, and he was right when he talked about the political process, which is to me and I agree with him, a very much a two-edged sword, because and that's one leg of civic health is the political process. Is that the power of the incumbency is so strong in this town, is that which lead towards a dearth of civic health, because what it says is that people who want to be involved in the political process, in the electoral process, finds it very, very difficult. One, the power of incumbency is so strong, and then another one is the incumbents play the numbers game. They know that all they need to get is, in the case of east of the river in Ward 8, if you get 6,000 votes, you can win. So you don't appeal to the mass of the 80,000 people or 75,000 people that live in Ward 8. You concentrate on the 10,000 that might possibly vote for you, which dumbs down the process of civic involvement and civic health. And I think that that the Initiative 83 will help with that, because I think there would have been some turnout that might be different. And this is such a critical part of what we do. Just for instance, there's the elephant in the room about the takeover, the possible takeover, a repeal of home rule. But we, east of the river in Ward 8, which we really, really work close with, have suffered from a dearth of leadership for the past 18 months, where we are basically, and I live in Ward 7, by the way, but work in Ward 8, but the resident of Ward 8 is effectively without representation, and will for the next foreseeable probably 6 months. And based on the outcome, we might be even further along than that. So it's kind of hard to say the civic health in east of the river is well, because it's not well. And we as ACC trying to do everything we can to make sure people understand the value of having representation and how important it is. Because if you're not on at the table, you are on the menu sometimes, and we can less afford to have the priorities and the services and the needs of residents east of the river not accounted for in the electoral process. Also, civic health talks about the engagement on local levels, such as civic organizations, such as ANCs, and all of those areas east of the river, particularly Ward 8 comes in last. There, we have vacancies in the ANCs where nobody even ran for the seat. We have civic associations that haven't met in months. So it's a fight here. And while the civic health might be a little bit better west of the river, east of the river, it's a challenge to try to promote and get people involved, because without civic involvement, you're just another statistic.
Thank you, Lamont. That's actually, that is a very salient point. I'd like to, I know we have Barbara Morgan on the call. Barbara, if you can turn on your camera, then you can join us and talk, because Barbara works with the Association of Civic Associations. So we wanted to have her also speak. But in order to be spotlighted, we need your camera on. I'm understanding the tech notes correctly.
Okay. Let me see if I can. My daughter is the one usually helps her mother with all of these kinds of things. And she's not here today.
Okay. Okay. Well, we can hear you. So if you want to share who you are and what your organization does, and then we were talking about the state. What do we think? How do we think about what civic health is and what the state of civic health is in DC?
Okay. Let me say this. I'm a native Washingtonian, and I have voted since we first had elections. That was in 1964. I remember that well because I voted in the first election. I have never stopped voting. And also, I am a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. We are celebrating 112 years. And we have social action where we take things like this up. Now, as far as Initiative 83, people need to be educated about Initiative 83. A lot of people don't know about Initiative 83. And I must say that I live in Ward 7. I have been active in Ward 7. I have been a Civic Federation president twice. And I also, going back to where the civic associations really did a lot for the city. Now, unfortunately, the ANCs are not doing some of the things that they need to do. As far as the money is concerned, they have money where they are supposed to let people know issues that are coming forth so that they will know about it. A lot of folk in our city, they run, but they don't fulfill the obligations. They put their names out there, but they don't do what they should do for the citizens. And so therefore, we have to do these kind of things. Now, I think it's wrong for folk to say that we do not understand about elections. It goes back to the point where you've got to educate the people. And that is something that is not happening. And the chairmen of all of the 1 through 8 of the Democratic parties or Republican parties or whatever parties there are out here, that they need to educate their people. They need to have meetings, and students need community service hours. Print flyers. Let the children go out and give flyers to the people to let them know about what is coming up, when the meetings are, when they will be held, and so forth. And the other thing is this: you've got to get into the schools. We have children in the schools who are 17 and 18 who will be voting. They've got to understand the process. They've taken the history of this city out of the DC public schools. It needs to go back in. There's a lot that our children can do. Now, like I say, I have been around a long, long time, and I was able to write the charter for the Democratic Party for the United States of America. And I know for a fact a lot of things that I learned, I did not learn in DC. I learned as I traveled around the country. And that's why I say we've got to put some education back into our DC schools so that our children will understand. Because this is how I got elected. The children knew me and my children. So they went home and they told their mothers and fathers and friends, that's so-and-so's mother. She stands for this. She does this. This is what we've got to do. And I still say that the Initiative 83, it needs to be explained to the people because a lot of them don't know what it means. Yeah. And I myself consider myself very savvy as far as these things are concerned. And I too have to look at Initiative 83. And as long as we do not have a delegate who can speak on the floor to these kinds of issues, we're not going to move anywhere. And that's that's my take on this. We've got to do a lot of education, and that's the key.
Yeah. So Barbara, thank you. Actually, that is speaking as the League, Women Voters, we've also tried to get, we have done some voter registration in schools and voter education, but I think our president, Barbara, would love to talk to you about getting into the schools and educating on voter and also not only registering, but getting out to vote. So I really appreciate your perspective on, all of that from your work over the years.
Excuse me, I must say that the Women of League Voters, I've known about you all for years because you have been very helpful in this city with us as far as getting out the vote.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. I also wanted to build on what you said. The last comment you said is, without actual representation in Congress, we're sort of stuck on a lot of issues. There's also a lot of discussion in the chat about the recent bills that were introduced in the House and Senate to repeal home rule. So I thought maybe we should talk about that now because it's clearly a issue that makes that is engaging people who are on this call, and we can talk about the different ways to that each of us are not approaching that. I will say from the League perspective, the bills that were introduced, from what I know, are they're messaging bills because they're like one sentence. They don't actually have they don't propose what would replace DC's local government. And so I think the key is just as a background, first of all, DC's home rule, the reason we have a mayor and a council is because Congress allows us to. and this is the problem of not being a state, right? So the league thinks ultimately the ultimate remedy to all this is statehood. But at the moment, we are in a situation with an administration and Congress that are sort of unfriendly to DC's status. So these bills have been introduced. They were introduced last Congress. They were introduced again. A group of organizations got together and issued statements about why this is not acceptable. The league's approach is to the work with our national league has a position that, obviously DC's autonomy should be respected. They are working with us on, putting out a call to members to say we support DC's autonomy. We have connections to our sister leagues in the other states, and we'll be reaching out to them and being like, heads up, there's an effort to have this undemocratic move to take away DC's local democracy. So it is something that we're working on, and we continue to point out that the ultimate remedy is statehood. So I don't know, Aaron. I guess if we follow the same order, it would be Aaron and then.
Yeah,
Natalie.
thank you. This is obviously the elephant in the room. I mean, the effort to repeal home rule is in many ways the end game of what we're up against. And my personal view is that there's value in being prepared for this and that it's coming for us. I think what we're seeing in terms of like the pilfering of the federal government is going to be aimed at DC next, and we just have to be prepared for it. What I am having a harder time wrapping my head around is that I've heard from people some interest in like not poking the bear and being quiet about it from a DC government perspective. And I think that runs the risk of complacency, and I'm not seeing a whole lot of anyway. At the outset, there were many statements I heard from higher up elected officials in DC about finding common ground and how this would be good for DC in terms of bringing federal workers back to downtown. And I think that's wrong. And going along with what's happening in any way just opens the door to infringement on home rule. What the response to that is, I'm not sure, because without voting representation, we're in a place where we don't have a lot of political power on this question. But I think personally that being prepared for the worst makes sense here, and I'm hoping, I haven't seen a lot of it, but I hope that our DC elected officials are thinking about worst case scenarios and how they will respond to it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, looking from a community neighborhood, obviously, particularly from food security, food justice perspective, having the representation to be able to vote for things like the president and vice president, we have a lot of residents in Petworth coming to the market using federal food assistance programs, right? And so the funding for those and having access to those, understanding how those programs work, being able to have local governments, there are grants that markets and things can apply for through the district to help those dollars go further, making sure that access still exists and making sure that the folks who are benefiting from those programs have a say in the elected officials who are allowing them access to that or having provided that access. I would agree that we should prepare for the worst. Obviously not something that I or any resident in Petworth wants to see happen. But again, we keep saying the word hyperlocal, but hyperlocal spaces are the things where you see that impact the most immediately, right? This is the community space. This is on an individual level, and that's where I think we're going to see the impacts first.
There's a question in the chat from Mary and Anne. I wonder, I'm messing up the order, but Anne and then Ankit, I wonder if you could answer the question in the chat from Marian about how DC residents can get involved, and then we'll go back in order.
So for us, what we need with the league is we need people who help us get the word out to other people in the States. I mean, we have very little, from our analysis, we have very little power in DC, because Congress ultimately has jurisdiction over us. And so if they want to repeal home rule and install, and that's the other thing, they haven't actually said what they want to do. I still view these bills as kind of performative, like messaging, because if you only have a sentence saying home rule is repealed, something has to happen with DC, right? Like, there used to be a 3-person federal commission and they had to appoint commissioners and they had to, or actually maybe not, because given how they're operating, all bets are off. I guess they could just repeal it and like we'd be on our own. I guess I don't know, but we are basically the idea is to reach out to others, to state leagues, and I think people can reach out to their friends in other states and say, you should let your member of Congress know that you think DC should, you shouldn't do this undemocratic action. That's the sort of pressure point that we have identified. So Ankit, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I'm taking this bill very seriously because we have a Republican Congress and president who have not been fans of DC and need to make sure that we're following this very closely. But I do agree with Anne that right now I think that I don't think that people need to freak out that this bill is going to pass in the next few months. I think that it's looking like a messaging bill where they're trying to get points for their base without a clear plan to actually get the bill passed. And I agree with Ann that one of the reasons you can see that is because they don't have a plan for what comes next. And so for the national politicians who are attacking DC, it's usually on the Republican side. This is really politics for them, and like how does it advance their politics or how does it not? And I don't think that they actually want to deal with DC, which is a rather large city and has its own problems and issues to deal with. And to me, I don't see them as wanting to have to deal with the problems of DC on top of the problems of the rest of the country, which they actually were elected to deal with. And so when you have a bill that ends home rule and has no additional steps, to me, that seems like something that actually would be unlikely that even most Republicans would support. And I had a conversation, last Congress when I was still a candidate with Senator Katie Britt from Alabama's office, and that was basically the point they made. They were like, "Well, the bill doesn't have any steps about what's next, and that's a problem for us." I think that when we probably should start getting a little bit more nervous is when they introduce a bill that, like, for example, moves us back to the commissioner system that has some number of co-sponsors on it. That's when I think they're starting to really think about it and what the next steps will be. The other thing I will add, though, even if we move to that level of attack, is we do still have the filibuster in the Senate, right? So it takes 60 votes in the Senate to surmount a filibuster, which means they would need 7 Democratic senators to go along with this. And so one of the things I will be working on is meeting with the Democratic senators, introducing myself and making the points about why they should stand strong and continue to filibuster any legislation attacking DC home rule. And I'm hopeful that we will be able, that they won't be able to get 7 Democratic senators who are going to vote to completely abolish home rule. And so that's why I'm hopeful that that kind of level of attack is not going to succeed while being aware that there are going to be attacks that unfortunately could succeed in this Congress. In terms of what can we do to get involved, somebody mentioned in the chat there's an organization called Free DC, and I can put the link to it in a second. And they're the ones who I think are really taking the leadership in terms of community engagement and community activism about how are we going to stop these things from happening. And it's true we don't have any voting senators who can vote against this bill, but there are still things that we can do as residents of the nation's capital to push back in maybe a more direct way on some of these people who are trying to move these bills forward. So I think that Free DC is taking that on and working on more protest type activities that could actually register with some of these sponsors in a way that will be helpful. So I think for those who want to get involved, Free DC is a great way to do it. My office, we're in the middle of putting up our website. It'll be up definitely within the next 2 weeks, hopefully within the next week. And once our website is up, I'm going to put the link that the URL that it will be. We don't have the URL ready yet, but you can check my website, and we'll continue to have updates on what's going on in community events you can join, and obviously you can join our list hosts as well. And so I think that those are two areas where you can get involved if this is something you're passionate about. And then, the other thing I'll say is that I think that we have seen over the past few weeks a real upswing in engagement amongst people who are opposed to the actions this administration is taking. And I'll say that I've definitely experienced it, where people are getting much more active and demanding more from their elected officials, especially on the Democratic side. And so I think it is important for us to be strategic, and I don't think that we need to be I don't think that we need to be out on the forefront of some of these movements, but I do think that it's not going to be sustainable for us to not speak out on some of this stuff, right? This stuff that's going on, it's impacting DC almost more than anyone else. You talk about the federal workforce. So many federal workers live here in DC, and those are our constituents and our neighbors and our friends and our loved ones who are being impacted. And so to just say we're just going to stay quiet about this and not say anything, I don't think that that's going to work in the long run. So I would say that I do think that I imagine we're going to start seeing some more some more outcry from our own elected officials about what's going on here. And as long as we do that strategically and we're in the saying the same stuff that everyone else around the country is saying, I don't see why that's a problem. If we're unique or special, then I start getting a little bit worried. But I think if we're in the general mainstream, then I think it makes sense to call out some of the stuff that is impacting DC specifically.
And can I say something? This is Barbara again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we are having what is known as Delta Days on the Hill. That's what we will be doing. We will also have a day, Deltas in New York. We have a seat day also. Now, I need to get with you, and so that we can get the language that we need so that our social action across the United States can put this message out to those chapters that are in the other states, to let them know what they're trying to do to us here in the district. And
Barbara, yep. Mm-hmm.
I would be willing to get with you and with our social action. And the other thing is this: you'd be surprised at the number of people throughout the United States that don't know that we do not have the voting rights here in the District of Columbia. And each one of us who have relatives, friends, and so forth, we need to be sending letters to those states, letting people know what they are trying to do to us here in the District of Columbia. Maryland doesn't want us. Virginia doesn't want us. So we've got to be here to do what needs to be done. And I'm quite sure that perhaps some others belong to other organizations, Knights of the Columbus, Masons. This is an effort that we all have to do, because they are infringing on our rights. They would not like it if it was their state.
Right. So yeah, Barbara, absolutely. Thank you so much. We actually, we had some of your Delta sisters alumni doing join us for the state fair outreach on statehood and all. And we would love to talk to you more about, because that is the league plan. I mean, it sounds funny. We're going to squawk, right? It's to reach out, let people in other states know who actually have representation in Congress that this is not okay, and their members shouldn't support any incursions of DC's right to govern itself and all that. And there is an advocacy day that is being planned by DC Vote, where we will need DC residents to come and help us talk to folks on the Hill and explain also the situation and talk about these risks. I want to give Lamont a chance. I see he is unmuted. He has thoughts, I'm sure.
Yes, let me just take just a little bit different approach to, I think, that the question of this latest salvo from Mike Lee of I think Utah, because I think we need to take this seriously. But I got two thoughts on this. We need to take this seriously because even though it doesn't have bite in terms of what will happen, it could very well be that it could be that the issue of how this would be governed will be worked out within another year. So you pass it now, and then you have a year to work it out, and then you come back and you're still in this this phase of the current Republican administration, and you sort of kind of figure out what this new system looks like. So I think we got to take it serious. Number two, I think it could be, and maybe you correct me, I'm not a parliamentarian, but it could be that this legislation could get a approval if it's done with budget reconciliation, where it's just a up and down 51 vote in the Senate to get things done. They pile on a lot of stuff with voting reconciliation. But the bigger question in my emphasis is always east of the river. This is where I do my work. It's where I live. For us, this offers a quite interesting proposition here. One, for people who are older, such as I am, public safety is paramount to us. And so you have people who are saying to us, and this bill is basically the safety bill and whatever have you. We want safety. Seniors want to be safe in their homes. We want to be able to walk to the Safeway or any of the other stores in our community and be safe. Right now, we're not safe. We are not safe. We're being taken advantage of. The crime is high, and it's something that is unique to Ward 7 and 8 and maybe parts of Ward 5. But the other cities don't share this with us. So while, a lot of people east of the river might not get as excited about whether or not home rule stay, when there's a question of if home rule go, what comes behind that be safe for me? Would there be an increased presence of police? Would it be some types of more safety, which is what they touting it at? Not necessarily is going to happen, but those are the issues when you are dealing with some baseline issues: food insecurity, a safety for seniors, safety for kids, 14-year-old from getting shot. Those are paramount issues for people east of the river that's not in Ward 3 or Ward 4 or Ward 1 or Ward 2. So that, I don't think that, and I've talked to a lot of people who say, I wish somebody would come and do something about the crime east of the river, because I want to feel safe. I want to age in place, and I want to be able to go out. So those are issues. So I think there's a little bit difference in terms of how maybe people east of the river may look at this in terms of yes, we like the fact that we have some semblance of home rule, not complete autonomy, and be able to govern our affairs and not statehood. But I think if we just sit back and not do nothing, it's a dangerous game that we're playing. So we need to watch everything that comes down the pike, because these things can be done awfully fast and awfully quick, stuck in a bill, in a reconciliation bill, and before you know it, it's on countdown time to see if they can put some system in to take home rule away and then put some other system. And you're right, they don't want this fight. If you want, this is like herding cats. So no, they don't want to run DC, but they want to make a statement. But sometimes you got to be careful because you might bite off more than you can chew, and you get what you ask for. So, but there is a lot of contention east of the river on how these things will affect us, and I don't think that it's as clear as it might be in maybe 5 of the 8 wards for the whole city.
Thank you, Lamont. Does anyone? I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think there's a as I was thinking about this session, I know there's a existential threat of our ability to create and strengthen our own civic health with what Congress and the administration might do. I think we've talked about some of the ways people can get involved in that. And I think, as Ankit has said, that free DC, I mean, there's the protests, and then there are also options for, I really think one of the hardest things is that you actually have to get friends and family outside of DC to care and then, reach out on behalf of DC. But I'm trying to loop it back around. I mean, I definitely encourage everyone who's worried about this on the call to either to sign up for Ankit's newsletter, to sign up for our newsletter, because we're taking action, and then free DC. If anyone else has another suggestion, that'd be great. We'll be reaching out to work in community. I mean, we do talk to other organizations regularly about what's going on with DC statehood and now home rule attacks. But to sort of set that aside, I know, which is hard, but I mean, if we're going to look at what we're doing right now in DC to, build our beloved community, or our strengthen our community, what is it that your organization or you are doing, or what you are, that you would encourage people to get involved in now that's a little more, I would say, concrete and local, and positive, rather than working against something? I mean, we're going to have to work against a lot of things, but maybe what can be we working for? I guess that's where I'm trying to get to. And I'll say, from the league standpoint, we are also, in addition to planning to, reach out about home rule attacks, we are also moving forward with, voter education. We still do voter naturalization ceremonies, which are lovely. I encourage everyone to participate in one. We are working on implementation of I-83. So that bill, the voters passed it, and it's now in front of Congress for the review period. But the key is, in order for that to actually become a way of voting that we can do in the district, we need to have the council fund it. So we're working on that, if anyone wants to join us in that. And we have a mighty climate team that is working on the bottle bill to help clean up, particularly the Anacostia and areas around there, but all over the city, and on the Beyond Gas coalition, to make sure the city lives up to its climate goals. I mean, we also need to move forward with how we want to be in the world, I think. So I will then turn it over to Erin.
Thank you, Anne. And I want to thank you and Lamont and Ankit and Natalie and Barbara and everyone here, because being here is taking action. I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed and one foot in front of the other, and each of you are doing things that are helping to improve the situation that we're in. So thank you for being here, and thank you for what you're doing. And I appreciate your reframing for something positive, because I tend to get doom and gloom when I start talking about this. And I want to mention something, which is actually why I think I was invited to be part of this panel, which is that we, back in September of last year, as part of the work of Advisory Neighborhood Commission 4B, hosted a voter registration party with Coolidge High School. And we successfully registered 71 Coolidge students to vote. That is, I mean, I've never been so proud of myself or anybody I've worked with. It was a huge accomplishment. And it was really fascinating to be in the room, because the teachers and the staff at Coolidge are just excellent. So, they brought students through. There were performances, the cheerleaders performed. It was a very festive environment. We got some local businesses like Lido Pizza to donate pizza. We had some news and neighborhood organizations tabling, but high school students are very anti. They're like, why are we here? We don't want to do this. And the teachers made them come through several times, and we physically watched students like increase their engagement with us. Like they were initially like, no, I don't care. Why would I register to vote? Then they would come over and ask a couple of questions. And then eventually they would sit down and fill out the paper to register. So it truly was the value that I think I added and that neighborhood level groups and organizing can add is having the right people in the room. So having both the school and food and entertainment and some giveaways, like it was the right collection of people to truly engage high schoolers. And I think there is a lot of opportunity to engage. A lot of people have mentioned this today, to civically engage our high schoolers and even younger, to register them to vote. And then as Ankit and others have mentioned, to continue to make the voting process easier and feel more meaningful to people. So the democracy reforms really do matter locally. And I think if you're feeling overwhelmed, these two things, both voter registration with youth and democracy reform locally, are things that you can do. There are lots of steps and ways you can get involved in that regard. So thank you again.
And I think I'll follow right along this train. First of all, thank you to everyone for attending. Agree that this is a great first step to getting involved. I think the biggest thing here that we've talked about, and coming from just a local farmers market perspective, statehood feels really big, federal policy feels really big, but the way to get involved is at the local level. I think something here that we can take away is that you can't vote to support a community, and you can't do things to support a community without knowing your community, understanding what some of those needs are, who your neighbors are, again, people who look both the same and different from you. So being able to engage in some of these local spaces, even if it's just maybe attending your farmer's market, right? And you start to see some of the same people in that space. And whether it's volunteering, I know, again, Petworth specifically, we have the Friends of the Petworth Library, but I know that there are organizations like that across the district. So being involved in those spaces where you are seeing some of the same people and you're able to make some of those connections in real life and not just online, super important to being able to understand and in turn support the rest of the community. So volunteering is wonderful. If you live in Petworth, we're always looking for volunteers at the market. But finding ways that you can create meaningful connection outside of just, oh, I need to be here with my kids, or I'm going to this restaurant with my spouse. Thinking about ways that we can be more intentional there.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for organizing this conversation. I think like exactly right to try to end it on what can we do to move things forward. Before I get onto that, I just wanted to, because Lamont raised an interesting point about the reconciliation, the budget reconciliation. So it's basically a very technical process where you can pass a bill through simple majority vote. There's a reason though it's called budget reconciliation, because it's under the rules, it's only supposed to be applied to spending bills. And obviously ending DC home rule is not a spending bill. And any rule of the Senate can be changed by a majority vote. So what I would say though is that if you can pass a repeal of home rule through budget reconciliation, you can pass DC statehood through budget reconciliation. And so anybody who's thinking about doing that, I would think about that fact, about if they're going to do ending home rule or whatever through budget reconciliation, we can do statehood and whatever else we want to do through budget reconciliation. So I think that's a bit of a double-edged sword right there. And Lamont also raised a really good point, which I want to talk about, is like something that we can do is what are the actual impacts of home rule? Like, why does it matter that we have home rule, and why would it matter for us to get statehood? Because obviously a lot of people, care about the democracy issues, but some people are not as focused on those issues. And so I think one thing you can do is talk to people in DC who might not be as plugged in on statehood or home rule, and explain to them the real world consequences of us losing home rule or us gaining statehood. And so I'm just going to give one example. Lamont talked about crime and high crime during home rule. Well, I mean, the president appoints our U.S. attorney who prosecutes all adult felonies. And he has appointed someone right now, the current president, President Trump, has appointed someone who is kind of not focused on fighting crime. This person, his name is Ed Martin. He fired 8% of the workforce of the prosecutors who prosecute violent crime, because they were also involved in the January 6th prosecutions. And so you talk about having people actually fight violent crime. Well, unfortunately, these actions, I'm worried, are going to result in people dying because we have not as many prosecutors out there. He's been telling Elon Musk that he's going to focus his prosecutions activities on prosecuting the enemies of the president rather than on prosecuting people who have committed crimes. And so that is, I think, a preview of what we would get without home rule, right? Is a prosecutor who is not focused on actually helping people in our community, but is focused on advancing the president's agenda by using the fact that so many important people live in Washington, D.C., and focusing the office on prosecuting those people who might not agree with the president. And so that's a direct impact. What would happen if we would lose home rule? Well, we would have a prosecutor who is completely and totally beholden to the president and has no interest in fighting for the people of DC. So if you can kind of tell those kinds of stories to people who might be a little bit less plugged in, here's why it matters, here's why you should get involved. I think that is important in growing the tent and getting more people to join this movement. I'll just mention a few other things. So of course, as Ann mentioned, would love for you all to sign up for my list host once my site is live. I posted the link up there about what it's going to be, and we'll have it up in a week or two, and then you can join the list host. I will also say that tax season is coming up. When you file your taxes, at the very end, most of us do online now. There's a little button you can click or a little link you can click saying see other options, and then you can donate some. There'll be a box that says donate funds to support the statehood effort, and so you can donate as much money as you want to support statehood efforts in DC, and that money goes to fund my office, to the statehood delegation office. And so we get some funding from the city council, but it's not the DC council, but it's not a lot. And so that helps us a lot. So if that's something you're open to doing when you're filing your taxes, that'll be an option for you. We actually also just literally, I think a few days ago, the DMV released a new license plate, a We Demand Statehood license plate. So if you're going to renew your license, I suggest you buy the We Demand Statehood vanity plate, and that funding, the fee, that you get for getting a vanity plate also goes to support the statehood office. And so you're supporting the office, and you're showing people that when they're seeing your car that there are people out here who really want DC statehood. So I'll say that, and then the last thing, I mentioned this already. Free DC is a great way to get involved in terms of like in-person volunteer efforts, and I think that if this is something you're passionate about, that's a great group to join. And I'll kick it to Lamont.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me here and allowing me to talk. But let me just start out by first saying thank you to two first-rate candidates, both Erin Palmer and Anka Jane, who during their run showed up at every time they were invited east of the river. Anka was at everything, and he was bringing the heat. And Erin is probably the most impressive candidate I've ever seen. She's smart, she's bright, she's got a lot of good ideas and a great future. Just wanted to say that. Anka, I think that, yes, the budget, reconciliation deals with the budget, but I do think that you can always, because there is money coming back and forth during the federal government, somehow they can make that work. That's neither here nor there. I hope it don't work, but we need to keep our eye on the prize and be working towards that. And we will always be looking at the situation. We have ACC, we stay on the front of voter education, and we're having a forum co-sponsored by ACC and Robert White that talks about the budget for DC's coming up and the priorities as it relates to Ward 8, because we don't have leadership at this time. We literally do not have leadership. We don't have somebody there representing the interests of these 75,000 people locally. And so somebody has to help out and stand in the gap. And Robert has decided that he wanted to come and have a conversation and let people vent the way they feel. Because, the problem comes in is that during these cycles, and as we know, with the vote coming up, it'd probably be late May, maybe early June, and that's right outside the budget cycle. And then we will get another time where a whole cycle where nobody represents the interest of Ward 8's 70,000 residents. And it's just horrible that this is the case. But our job is to make sure that the residents stay aware and that we help them and guide them through the process so we have adequate leadership that's available to every one of the citizens of the real of Washington besides Ward 8 at this particular time. And it's just the way it goes. But we have to keep our eyes on the prize. We have to keep what's happening. I know that with these layoffs, the city might benefit from people going back to work with lunch taxes and all of this and occupancy rates in buildings and all that kind of stuff. But at the same token, if you're laying off massive of young people who are in the city for government jobs and they have to leave out of the $3,000 and $4,000 apartment downtown, that's going to be a loss as well, because then the real estate occupancy rate will drop. So we're facing a lot of battles at this particular time, and we gotta and more are coming every day. Every day you wake up, every day I get a blink on my phone. It's something crazy that Mr. Crazy has done that we talk about it like, oh yeah, this is not going to happen. You can't say that because he's going to do it and then let the court decide it might not happen, and that could result in some effect way down the line. But the immediate effect is that people are fired and families are harmed, and the DC takes a really, really painful hit. I know I serve on the board of Martha's Table, and we have an emergency meeting on Thursday, because the budget cuts and these things that they're talking about doing is going to greatly affect the work that we do. And if we're not prepared to understand that this might be the case, our services could be cut tremendously, and the people who need those services the most, when they need those the most, food and with food insecurity and job insecurity, they won't be able to get that. So we got to keep our eyes on the prize. We got to stay focused. We got to whack-a-mole, because it's going to be a whack-a-mole for the next 2 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Lamont. You got to be ready to support each other too. That's the other key message out of that. Barbara,
Yes.
Morgan, yeah, there you are.
I just want to say that we have a new member from Ward 7 that's on the city council. He's doing a wonderful job trying to educate the people in Ward 7. And we've had a number of folk who have come out and they have registered, they have voted. And I'm glad to see a young person doing the things that he is doing and so forth. Not only that, he has a meeting that's scheduled at Eastern High School where he is going to be doing some things. And also, I want to say that I attended the meeting Tuesday night over at St. Benedict's, which was held in the Quanda Room, about the stadium. That too is something that we need to be looking into. Some of the things that were brought up and so forth. There's a lot of land, and I will close by saying this. I saw an exhibit that's at the golf course, Langston Golf Course, since this is Black History Month, that is well worth taking a look at that. And as I say, there is the Divine Nine, and we also have a lot of the young folk who are in college and so forth. And we need to get the message to those young people, because believe it or not, this new administration, they are cutting the funds. And who is going to be hurt the most? people. And we've got to be on the forefront to combat some of these things that are coming forth. We've got to do that because it's not only going to affect me, I'm a senior, but I also know that I stand on the shoulders of many people that helped me get where I am today. And it's up to us to bring our young people along for them to understand what is needed and what we've got to do if we are going to survive. I don't think we got any billionaires or millionaires on this conference. With that, I thank you, and I'm glad to be invited to this meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks everyone for joining us. It does remind me, and I'm sorry I cannot attribute it to somebody, but what I always think about is the person who said, I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And keeping a healthy, vibrant community going has always required people to do something. So I want to turn it over to Grace, who will, I don't know, maybe wrap this up, but also take Q&A. So please, everyone, stay on so that I know there were Q's and A's in the chat, but I don't know if we've addressed all of them. So and if folks have other Q's and A's, Grace is here. So thanks.
Yeah. Feel free to drop them in the chat. I think it's helpful just for even though some of them have been answered in the chat, to just say them out loud for people who can't read the chat. So for that reason, I'll just go back over a couple of them. The first one that I saw was related to farmers markets. So Natalie, this one will be particularly for you. How does someone go about finding their local farmer market, and what resources would you use to research that?
Yeah, great question. So most of the farmers markets in DC are run by an organization called Fresh Farm, which is a nonprofit organization, and they help kind of run those farmers markets. They have a really excellent website, and I can throw the link in the chat here in just a second. They have a great website, and you can kind of go through on a map and see where those farmers markets are located. Some of them are a little bit bigger, things like in DuPont. Some of them are a little bit smaller. Like ones run up on Kennedy Street a little bit further north in DC, things like that. So that's really good. There are a couple of other independently run markets. I believe the District of Columbia also has a website where they list out where things like SNAP, WIC, and senior benefits for food assistance programs are accepted. And so I'll also get the link to the DC website where they show those farmers markets as well. But also, when all else fails, Googling farmers market DC. Those will also pop up on your Google Maps.
Natalie, we have one at Northeast too.
Yes, absolutely. I know that there are several of them in Northeast as well. Let me grab those links to make sure everyone can.
Yeah, and Southeast.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Natalie. While you are dropping those in the chat, I will move to our next one. So Erin, do you have any suggestions for informing folks about the importance of ANCs and also just how to run to be an ANC?
Thank you. And I was furiously typing in response to this because I think this information is important, and I hadn't yet spoken to that specific issue, which, Grace, when you pulled up your slides at the beginning, you showed something very important. It was just a snapshot of some of the ANCs, but there are so many uncontested races. There are a lot of vacancies. There are a lot of ANCs. There are, close to 400 citywide. And having people in those seats really matters, and having good people in those seats really matters. But it's also kind of hard because there are so many. A lot of people don't know what ANCs are or do. And so I put in response in the chat, Greater Washington has a lot of resources about what advisory neighborhood commissioners are and what they do. That is an advocacy organization, so they have their own lens on things. So keep that in mind, but they do have a lot of resources, including about how to run for ANC. I think one of the best things people can do who are interested in running is to talk to current or former commissioners about their experience. It's a it's a volunteer gig, so you're doing it in addition to the other things you do in your life, which, you know, you have to be careful about drawing boundaries so that you don't just drown in it. But advisory neighborhood commissioners and commissions can have a meaningful impact, both on the hyper local, on things like getting speed humps on your block, you know, making sure trash is picked up regularly, those kind of bread and butter block by block issues, but also citywide. I mean, we put a lot of pressure on the council on pieces of legislation and testified at hearings, fought for school health and safety. There's just a lot of ways you can have impact. And one of the benefits of being a commissioner, in my view, is that they're nonpartisan. So when you're going around, when you're engaging with neighbors, you kind of remove that lens to it, and it does open the door to just trying to represent the people right around you, and gives you the opportunity to do it in a slightly different way. And finally, I'll just offer that if anyone ever wants to talk to me about running for ANC, it's something I enjoy talking about, and I like providing that information. So please feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you so much. And I know the last question that we had got a little bit to this, but maybe in like 1 to 3 sentences. What would each of y'all say would be like the next immediate follow-ups or like next steps that you would recommend to someone who wants to get involved in any of the issues that you said like over the last couple hours? And we can start with Anne.
Well, I don't know. That's like a softball. I mean, of course, I'm going to say join the league. At a minimum, sign up for our newsletter because you can, if you don't want to commit to joining at the moment, we certainly welcome people to participate in our activities. We are going to need people who are willing to reach out to people in states and talk about that real people actually live in DC and deserve democracy as well. So that would be my pitch. Thanks.
All right. How about you, Lamont? I'll just go around on my screen.
Okay. Yes, I think that's a great question. And I think that we need to really get involved from the local level to the national level because this fight is real and we are in the throes of it right now and we have to get involved. And the city we save might be our own.
Natalie?
I'll echo kind of what I was saying earlier, right? Can't vote to support a community that you don't know or understand. So if there are opportunities to, not necessarily have to volunteer scads of time to try and support an organization, but just walking through those community spaces, being in your local library, going to farmers markets. And if you can volunteer additional time, maybe dedicating some hours to that as well, but getting to know your neighbors and understanding the things that affect them.
Ankit.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very simple. Just find an organization that you think does work you're interested in and show up to a meeting and get involved. I think that the hardest part is just getting started. And so there's so many organizations doing important work on, especially on, specifically on statehood and home rule, like the League, like Free DC, list goes on. So yeah, find one that you think is interesting and show up to a meeting.
Barbara, if you're still here, I think you might have moved on my screen.
Yes, I would like to see, and I'm looking at those of us who are here today. I would love to see us going into the schools. I was a former educator myself, and that's why I'm pushing for education. I would like to see some of the young people, and I think we need to go into the schools because that is where our future is. And I think that we need to go in and where the schools don't have civic, I think that we need to see if we can go in or maybe one Saturday get each one of our city council members to have a day where the students can come and express they would like to see and what they want to become involved in and so forth. Because we have to remember one thing. Our children are our future. All of us stand on the shoulders of somebody who took an interest in us. That's why we are here. And that's not happening this day and time. We've got to do something. As a matter of fact, I follow the 6th District, where I used to sit on the board of the Citizens Advisory Council. And if you look at the statistics, crime has gone down in some of the areas. It's not like it was. But, you know, we've got to talk to our young people. We've got to do that. And that's what I would like to see all of us do, because they are the future.
Okay, thanks so much, Barbara. And then last but certainly not least, Erin.
Thank you. All of these are excellent suggestions, and I like OnKits in particular for its straightforwardness and simplicity. And I will echo it by saying that folks can attend Advisory Neighborhood Commission or Civic Association or other neighborhood group meetings. A lot of that is easier now that it's hybrid. So it's easy to pop into things and not feel like you have to commit to a full meeting or be stuck somewhere for many, many hours. But beyond that, I think there is and will be increasing value in how we relate to each other and have our connections with our immediate neighbors and family and friends. And I would just invite everyone to share food with your neighbor. Like, find a way to connect, usually over food. That's my preferred method, and I think it's a good way of building something together. Like, just open your door and connect with somebody around you. And those networks, those relationships are going to be what sustain us over this challenging time, and also help us build strength and civic health. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions in the chat. If you have any last minute burning questions, definitely drop them. But if that's it, thank you guys so much for all being here, especially on a weekend. Really appreciate it. You gave us a lot to think about, and I think a lot of really good to-dos for folks who want to get more involved. Following up on those last couple of points about finding organizations and wanting to get involved, if anyone here has an issue that they care about and they want help finding an org to get involved, please reach out to the league. We are happy to help facilitate those connections because we want people to be involved. And maybe the league isn't your home. We hope it is, but if it's not, we want to help you guys find wherever your civic home is. And with that, thanks everyone, and everyone have a good rest of your weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.